Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Hollywood Breaks. Once again, I'm joined by our guest co-host Robin Geisen as Tim continues his worldly travels. This week, you'll get Robin and I's first reactions to Top Gun Maverick, as well as its prospects for the upcoming weekend against Jurassic World Dominion. And we also tackle the changes that are forthcoming over at Warner Brothers and what that means for the industry at large. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of Hollywood Breaks. We would be remiss if we didn't at least talk a little bit about Top Gun Maverick. I have to say, I'll reserve my opinion until after you go, because I would like you to go first, ladies first. You're our guest host today. So please, what are your thoughts on Top Gun Maverick?
Well, I have to preface this by saying the original Top Gun is one of my favorite movies of all time. Like, it's one of those movies that every time it's on, I watch it. Even if I watched it last night, I watch it again today. If it's on again, I just watch it. I leave it on if I stumble across it. Unless it's the part where Goose dies, then I kind of go somewhere else and then I come back because I just don't want to see that part. It makes me sad. So, my expectations were, like, I will say that I was very nervous about coming into this and hesitant because I love the original so much. But I think that I think they sought out to do the impossible by agreeing to do this movie. But damn it, they did it. Like, I had a smile on my face from start to finish. I was nervous because I was like, what's the music they're going to use? And as soon as, first of all, I'm going to rewind. I'm a jumbling mess right now because I'm so excited by it. Tom Cruise, to put that little clip of him talking and introducing the movie beforehand, I thought was genius, by the way. I thought that was brilliant.
Oh, I didn't get that.
Oh, you didn't?
Nice.
Oh,
no.
It was a little, just a 30-second setup of him just sitting in a studio saying, it's taken so long for us to bring this to you, but we're so excited to finally be able to give it to you. Right. And then to play the music again and not, to actually just bring us back was the most genius thing you could do. I think it was tremendous. It's why we go to the movies. It's exactly why we go to the movies. And everything about it just made me so happy. I think Tony Scott would be looking down on us right now saying, well done. Kudos to Kaczynski for, that is no easy task, no. Right? No. But between Bruckheimer and Tom Cruise and Kaczynski, like, they really found, I think, the perfect tone. And, Miles Teller was brilliant casting as Goose, like our Goose's son. Yeah, yep. Yeah, sure. Like, I felt like I was looking at Anthony Edwards. It was so great. Yep. And I will say, like, I looked around when I got in the movie theater. This is the other thing. The tickets were sold out at my theater. And so I had tears in my eyes because of that. But also because when the music came down and started playing, I was like, oh my God, I got chills of this, where they have all the aircraft are on the aircraft carrier and you see the jets landing. It's like, oh my God, like, I had chills. And I turned around and looked at the theater, and behind me, people were just like transfixed. Everyone had a smile on their face. I literally cried. I cried because I was just so moved. Don't laugh at me.
I'm not. It
was my favorite movie of all time. I cried out of happiness. I cried later during the movie. I don't want to do any spoilers, but I cried later too in the movie. But I cried also just because it was the first time that I have been in a theater in over 3 years where it felt like we became the collective we again. It was awesome. It was awesome. Your turn.
Yeah, I would. Well, you stole a lot of my thunder, but that's okay. You're allowed.
Sorry.
I'll give you my perspective from sort of out of the bubble of LA perspective.
Yeah.
I went on when did I go? I think I went on Tuesday of last week. I think that's when I went. Yeah. And I went at a 11:30 IMAX showing. But normally when I go to these, like when I went to see Spider-Man, granted, this was weeks, almost months after it had been released. And I was slightly embarrassed to be seeing it so late after everybody else. And I was like one of the only people in the theater. It was me and like one other person. But I went at 11:30 at an IMAX, and there were probably close to 30 or 40 people, which on a Tuesday in not summertime, I was kind of surprised there were actually people there. But I had a very similar reaction to you when it started, and the music was very similar to the original. I was like, are they really going to do this? And I started thinking to myself, if they actually go to Danger Zone, I'm just going to be giddy as all get out. So obviously that's what they did. And it was almost almost a exact replication of the original opening, which is obviously iconic. Yeah. And from that moment, I was smiling. I don't think I stopped smiling the rest of the way, because it was an absolutely phenomenal movie from start to finish. I could quibble on little bits here and there, but I'm not going to do that. But it was really I think you're right. They threaded the needle as far as taking a movie that has pretty much defined a generation really in the 80s and kind of went dormant for 30 years. And then it comes back in a completely different generation, and yet still does sort of the business that it did that opening weekend. I mean, yeah, it was great. I loved it. I walked out of the theater and smiling, and it's probably the best time I've had at the movies in good 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 years or so. Yeah. And I will say that it's the first time since I moved out of LA that I actually people applauded during the movie. Yeah. And that has not happened here in Philadelphia. I know it happens a lot in LA, but especially because most of the people worked on the movie or know somebody who worked on the movie. So it's always like one of those things. But out here, that rarely ever happens. And but yeah, it was a stellar job. I mean, my expectations were a little higher because I'd had it on good authority that it was a really good movie. And so my expectations were pretty high when I went to see it. And I went to see it in IMAX, which, by the way, I would highly recommend you do, because they shot a lot of it in IMAX. And it's when those jets go overhead, I mean, man, the seats rocking. I mean, it was great. I mean, it was really, because I don't like paying to go see something in IMAX unless they shot it in IMAX. And I can thank Christopher Nolan for that, because I watched the first 6 minutes of Dark Knight in IMAX, and that was jaw-droppingly amazing. So I was like, okay, if they shot it in IMAX, I will go see it in IMAX. But if there's some kind of lame conversion, then I'm not into it. But they actually shot some of the sequences in it, and it definitely shows. And yeah, I agree. I think, I mean, I mentioned this a little bit in my newsletter this week, and I'll be interested to see if you agree or disagree with me. Yes, it's exciting, and I think you're right. There's a sense that this is sort of like the moving on point from COVID, and the demos were obviously skewed older. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. I don't think it got any really, I mean, just from the numbers I saw, it didn't seem like it got a lot of people under the age of 25. But do you think this ultimately, because what we've been talking about, you, I, and Tim, throughout the course of the last 2+ years is, yes, it's great that people are going to the movies again for certain movies, but does this solve the ultimate problem, the giant iceberg that is coming towards us, that there's been nothing done to improve the experience, really? And I argued a lot that yes, people came back to the theaters, but at the same time, did it also remind them why the theaters can be such a pain in the butt? Because they're not, I mean, listen, you and I live in metro areas. So we get, particularly you being in LA, you get top of the line experiences. I can go to an IMAX theater that's 10 minutes. You can go one that's probably one every other block where you are. So we can get the top of the line experience. The rest of the country doesn't have that. They get small theaters that are sort of falling down, overrun, not well managed. And I wonder if they're still because the celebratory sort of like blockbusters are back, and when we get Tim back from his European jaunt, we'll definitely challenge him on that, because his big thing is that the blockbuster is officially dead. So and everyone's sort of talking all about how movies are back, the blockbuster's back. Are we? I feel like, to be quite honest, that we're sitting in CinemaCon, sucking down the Kool-Aid that everyone seems to scream and shout that we're all fine, everything's fine. Day and date doesn't work, movies are back, baby, woohoo! It's like, at a certain point, we can celebrate the wins, but the overall issues that have been confronting the industry over the course of the last 2 years are still there, are they not?
They're absolutely still there. Look, I think, this is a blockbuster. I would tell Tim that the blockbuster is back.
Duly noted.
The blockbuster is back when it delivers, right? And here's the thing that this is my husband. This movie made my husband, you're going to laugh at this, and I wish I had a picture to show you. He went to the movie in one of his old flight suits. He was in the Navy.
I saw it on Instagram. I saw your picture. I was like, that's awesome.
Who's in his 40s.
The buttoned up real estate guy.
With aviators on in the dark. And people were like, by the way, he wasn't the only one dressed up either. And there were random people, and people were applauding and clapping and loving it. Like, this movie penetrated pop culture, right? That is the definition of a blockbuster to me, when it becomes something bigger than itself, right? Mm-hmm. And Top Gun obviously is, and when the movie delivers like it has, there's nothing better. There's nothing better. Now, I think, Hollywood has gotten caught up with this, and it's hard, I imagine when you're doing so many pieces of content, before, way back in the 80s, they weren't delivering this many movies across the board from distribution in general, not just theatrically, but now we're dealing with streaming, and we're just being inundated with content, right? So the thing that this movie did that we're not really talking about either, people wonder what the secret sauce is. And there's no secret sauce, otherwise every single movie would work, right? But I think Hollywood needs to take a step back and learn that this is the feeling that we want when we go to the movies. This is the feeling that we want to feel when we leave the movies. We want to be entertained. We don't want to be preached to. I think Hollywood has gotten caught up in trying to get us to relate to the characters versus just actually relating, right? We actually relate to, which is weird. I'm not, I don't fly jets, but I can relate to the feelings that every single one of those characters were feeling, because it just was human. It was a human experience. If that makes sense, right? So
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Pure entertainment, and that's why we go to the movies. That's why I go to the movies. That's why I fell in love with the movies. It's all about, it's storytelling to get you to be able to relate to this character instead of trying to force it down our throat in some way or another. And obviously, I'm not saying that those stories shouldn't be told, but this is where we're at now. So we need to, what is the right distribution outlet for those stories? Not every movie should get a huge theatrical release like Top Gun, right? That's how we need to set them up for success. Like when you talked about Kevin Getz, and I completely agree with every single thing that he has said, right? It's about budget, setting it up. We have to take each individual property and set it up for success, so that we can actually deliver on it. And take a step back, what does that mean? Does it get a theatrical release? Do we do streaming? How much do we spend? We're not saying don't make the movie. We're saying, how do we make this movie and still be successful, right? And that's what we need to talk about. I think that's the conversation that needs to be had in order to be able to do that. Now, I don't think that this, not every movie is going to come out and be massively successful just because Top Gun was. It doesn't mean that movies are back It means that this movie brought people out, and that's it. I mean, Jurassic World is going to be really interesting to see where this comes in, because that has other challenges. And you and I were talking about Top Gun's holdover this weekend, which was
phenomenal.
Insane.
I think it was the best holdover ever for a movie that made over 100 million
for a movie
opening weekend.
Yeah, for a movie that makes over,
it dropped like 32%. And then it's interesting, I read an article where they showed like Mouth of Madness, Doctor Strange dropped like 67%. Even Spider-Man dropped 60 to 65%, because they just make so much money that first weekend.
It's normal,
which is normal. Yeah. But the fact that Top Gun only dropped 33% is just, and I mean, you and I were talking about this earlier. I think it's just going to keep going and going and going and going and going.
Well, that's
I think everybody's talking about it.
Yeah, that's a distribution play. It'll take a chunk out of Jurassic's opening weekend, I think. But don't forget that Jurassic is actually going to take all the IMAX screens, right?
Yeah.
So it will have a drop. It will have a bigger drop this weekend, because it won't have the premium formats that it has held for the past 2
relied on.
Right.
Yeah.
So it will have a bigger drop. But
it's interesting to me what you just brought up about sort of the idea of it was such a human experience, and people just want to be entertained and not just. I mean, we've talked a lot about this on the podcast about, sort of woke Hollywood and the lecturing and all this kind of stuff that just doesn't really appeal to a broad mass audience.
Yeah.
But I think, just thinking about it, when you said that, I immediately thought of like, you know what? I feel like Tom Cruise has kind of shifted to the point now where he just wants to be the consummate entertainer, in terms of just being the old school movie star who just makes movies that he knows the audience are like, everyone is going to love. Like there was a moment when he was making movies that he was chasing the award, he was trying to win an Oscar, and then at a certain point he just was like, you know what, I'm just going to make movies that I really want to make and that I know the audience are going to love. And he just has that ability to make movies that people, and then just the way he puts himself into them, and wholesale, and everyone knows that about him, to the point where he's created this brand for himself that if he's in the movie, everyone knows it's going to be a wild ride, you're going to have fun. And then on top of that, you take a movie like Top Gun, which was so formidable for so many people, just in terms of, it was my favorite movie growing up. It's one of the movies I actually remember seeing in the theater, and it's very similar to you, is when I was like, I want to do that for a living. I want to make that kind of stuff for a living. So, I totally I get that. And I think that's a very smart way to think about it. And I think you're right. There is an opportunity to sort of shift gears a little bit and sort of really try to tell stories in a smart way, and not throw huge money at, these movies that just may not necessarily have an audience anymore, or, try an original story, but just always go into it with the idea of just entertaining the audience, rather than the point you made, which I thought was really smart, rather than like getting the people to like, I think the way you described it was like, understand the characters, or, really to dive into the characters, which, it's not necessary. You don't need to go into that level of detail. Like you said, just make it feel like a human experience, and everyone can relate. And I think that sort of nails it on the head in terms of what the success of. So I don't always want to be the pessimist about the biz, but I'm going to be cautiously optimistic that there are going to be some lessons learned here. And it's interesting, because I think what we're seeing now is a continuation of sort of the shifting of sort of the leadership in Hollywood in general. And obviously this past week we had the announcement that Toby Emmerich, the longtime head, well, not so long, but survived quite a few bake-offs over there at Warner Brothers, is now stepping down, and Mike DeLuca, also of New Line, and Pam Abdi will be taking over as sort of the heads of just Warner Brothers. And that they're siloing things now. It's going to be Warner Brothers New Line, Family, Warner Brothers Family, and then I think DC. And then they're going to supposedly hire someone to oversee Family, and then I'm assuming that means Walter Hamada will most likely be departing, and then they'll put somebody new to run DC, but who knows at this point. But it's interesting because You know, Mike DeLuca obviously has a storied history at New Line. I worked at New Line for almost 3 or 4 years, and stories about him, his tenure in New Line were legendary. You know, he obviously made a lot of great movies when he was there, discovered a lot of great directors. You know, their tenure at MGM, you know, they made some good movies, Licorice Pizza being one of them, but you know, they spent a lot of money. And I'm not sure that movie recovered its budget. So I'm wondering, do you think that they'll bring a sentiment to the one, because Warner Brothers obviously has struggled over the last couple of years, and they've had some hits, but their reputation was dinged with Project Popcorn dumping all the slate on HBO Max. Do you think that DeLuca and Abdi will bring sort of the sort of revitalization that Warner Brothers needs, or is it still going to be, you know, because they've made a lot of smaller movies. They haven't done the big blockbusters, and DeLuca, you know, he doesn't have a lot of that experience. He's a couple films that have been bigger blockbusters, but not many. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are in terms of whether or not that means a real sea change in terms of where Warner Brothers is headed, especially given what Zaslav really wants to start to see out of that division.
Look, I mean, I think they have the opportunity to do so. So anyone who's presented with the opportunity, I think, you know, has the opportunity. So I'm opposite of you. I'm actually like super optimistic, right? And I come in and see it all as for them to come in and just take a big picture view, take a step back. Here's where we're at. This is what's working. This is what's not working. You know, having a leader like Zaslav actually, I think, is a good thing, because he seems to have a blueprint of the next 10 years at least, where he wants to go. So that's helpful, because when you don't have that, that's where, and they didn't have that. That didn't exist.
No, they really didn't. That's a good point.
So that's a big part of, like, now we kind of know where they need to go, what they need to do, what needs to happen. So it becomes a lot easier to be able to pick and choose what projects you're going to make, which ones get the big budget, which ones don't get the big budget, et cetera, right? So I think that they have the opportunity to do so. And I think Warner Brothers is this, you know, I mean, they have a massive library, legacy library, right? They have so much to tap into and so much opportunity to really explore. So I have faith in them, and I think they're going to come in there and kill it. I hope they do, and I'm rooting for them. That would be good for moviegoers and the business. So you know, look, they have the opportunity to do it. I think they can. So we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, I think your point about Zaslav actually seems to have a plan and a blueprint of where he wants to go. Obviously, he's under a lot of pressure coming from sort of investors and his board, because he has $55 billion worth of debt to offload from the merger itself. So obviously, you know, he's got to be very smart about spend, and he's been very clear that they're not going to dump a ton of money at content trying to chase it, the unicorn as far as, winning the streaming races go. They've cut back at Turner and TNT. They're not going to be making originals anymore. HBO Max movies are going away. They're not going to be just making movies for HBO Max. It's all going to be theatrical, which, as you said, is really great for moviegoers. And I'm cautiously optimistic again that this will hopefully lead in that direction. My only concern is that I feel like Zaslav might be biting off a little bit more than he can chew, because all three of those division heads are going to report to him. And there's nobody sort of in between, which, for someone like Zaslav, who oversees such a massive empire, like Warner Brothers Discovery is huge. It's a massive company now. Discovery is no spring. It's not a tiny company at all.
Right.
And to sort of oversee all those pieces as well, and sort of the day to day. And, I don't know what the ins and outs of Greenlight Authority are, whether or not Zaslav has the final say, or whether or not, DeLuca and Abdi will just say, we want to make this movie and here's the budget we want to make it at. And then Zaslav says, go, or there's a certain break point where, okay, anything under 100 million you guys can make, but everything over that, you have to come to me for approval. I have no idea what that looks like. And that's obviously going to be a big question. And there's also rumblings that Alan Horn, the stable godfather of the industry who basically built Disney into the behemoth that it is now, along with Bob Iger, and also built Warner Brothers and Castle Rock. Probably has the most storied career of any current living executive, I would say. Is also sort of in the background, so there's a possibility he might consult. But do you think that's going to be a challenge? I would argue, I think it is going to be a challenge for one person to oversee those three divisions and still make sure all the trains run on time, on top of everything else that he has to do.
I think, look, yeah, it's a huge undertaking. And yes, it's going to be a challenge. However, I think he has to do it in order to suss out where his needs are, right? Mm-hmm. So I think he's going to have to, when you're at that point that he's at right now, when you talk about the debt that that they're facing, mm-hmm. You got to get your hands dirty, and you got to get in there, and you got to really know, like, in order for him to know, he has to kind of remove some of those layers first to say, okay, this is what I need and this is what I don't need. He has to get in there himself, I think, to really realize, and he is, it seems that way. It seems like he's really trying to figure that out. And so once he figures out what those needs are, then yeah, I think he'll bring in people and appoint people in the certain roles that they have to be in. I think all of this is just time's going to have to tell, and he's going to have to get his hands a little bit dirtier, and he's going to have to get in deeper than someone at his level would usually get, just for him to be able to know what his needs are going to be.
Right. Yeah, I think that seems to me to be where the biggest challenge for him is going to be. I think he has sort of figured out a lay of the land. And, obviously when DeLuca and Abdi left Amazon, there was an opportunity and Zaslav jumped at it. DeLuca has phenomenal filmmaker relationships. He's very well liked, which obviously goes a long way in a town that's built on relationships. And so I think that's going to definitely assist him in terms of Zaslav in particular, in terms of, really being able to restore Warner Brothers' somewhat tarnished brand post Project Popcorn. And it will be interesting to see if anyone else steps in. I mean, I know that Emma Watts supposedly interviewed for that job, but she wanted more green light authority than Zaslav was willing to give. So I think maybe that may or may not have been the sticking point. But either way, it'll be interesting to see if anyone steps into that role. I think Zaslav will probably take some time to see if he can handle all of it. I mean, the guy's never made movies. And Hollywood is littered with names of people who showed up thinking that I have the purse, it can't be that hard as long as I know how to manage a budget and, profit and loss, it should be easy. But so much of it is relationships, and there's a lot of egos going on, and a lot of it's gut instinct. Yeah. And, Zaslav, I think because of where he comes from, and I think we talked a little bit about this when we compared Zaslav to Kareem Daniel, Disney, and Zaslav did a lot of the hard work of like meeting with as many people as he could, getting under, building those relationships, and understanding the industry. But still, it's ultimately, when you bear it down, no matter how much data you have, data can be an assist, but it's not going to overcome the gut.
Right.
And I would say that would be the one concern I would have with him, because his experience is really in building a crack shot operation on reality TV. Because when he came in to run Discovery, it was an education channel, right? Everyone watched Discovery for the education and Earth shows and Shark Week and all this other kind of stuff. And then he comes in, kind of cuts a lot of that out, closes all the stores, and starts building this, massive reality TV operation, to the point where now you've got, all these crazy wacko celebrities, reality TV stars, and go from that to sort of true storytelling, like the industry that sort of built it all. And I don't really know how much those skills translate. So I think that's going to be a challenge. I think you're right. He's probably got his plan. He knows what he's got to do. He's bringing in the right people, but there does need to be an understanding of the challenge of the industry, and maybe he has that, and maybe you know, Brian Lord, who supposedly hosted him throughout the industry and, you know, introduced him to a bunch of people, can kind of help him along the way. And obviously, if he has Alan Horn in his ear, also very smart, because Alan has a wonderful record of success in the industry. But I think that's going to be one of his biggest challenges, is sort of coming from a world that's not in a lot of ways similar to what, you know, the industry does on a day-to-day.
Yeah, I would say, I'm going to say this. I'm going to, you know, we talked about Kareem before, and I think there's a big difference between Kareem and Zaslav too, which is Kareem already has a system in place. He already has the structure. They've already got the team. They've got Lucasfilms, which is being handled. They've got Marvel, which is being handled. They've got these, they're already, the wheels are turning, right?
Right.
They're already running. They're off and running. There's a big difference now because there's a lot of change happening at Warner Brothers. So like Kareem has the luxury of being able to give the reins to his team, right? And he trusts his team, and he's able to have that luxury to take a step back and let them do their work. And I think Zaslav doesn't have that luxury right now. And I think he's trying, and clearly he knows that, and he's doing a good job at trying to bring in other people, and he's making all these changes. Now, you know, the big thing of, it's not just because it's, you know, storytelling, this is the tricky part of the business. And this is where it's not just him, it's going to be everybody involved, because there's when a movie gets greenlit, there's so many people involved that are under that wave of pushing it to finally get past that point, right? I think what Zaslav needs to do is take a step back in the next 10 years, and he needs to design a slate, right? Of like, where do we want to go? What's going to help us get there? What are our franchise opportunities? What are the other movies? Like, again, you know, you talk about some movies don't have an audience anymore. I disagree. They still have the audience, I think. However, the audience, and I don't even think the audience is smaller. I just think the audience doesn't have as much urgency to go see it in a theater as they would to watch it at home, right? So because they're being inundated with all these other pieces of content. So that's where it becomes, okay, I'm not saying don't make these movies. If we want to make this movie that's a small budget or has an audience that's this big, let's figure out how we can do that and do it successfully, right? So that's all. And then it becomes, in each one of those projects, it's not just the responsibility of Zaslav or the people at who are under him at Warner Brothers either. It's everybody in the industry who's going to be greenlighting these movies also needs to take a step back and go, how do I set my movie up for success? Instead of, maybe I shouldn't ask for this gigantic budget if I don't need it. Maybe I shouldn't pay this amount of money. Like, we need to stand our ground. We need, if we want successful business, again, you said it's show business, not show friends.
Show friends, yep.
Like, and I think Zaslav gets that. I think he does. And that's where anyone who works for him, if I were Zaslav, that would be like my number one thing of why is this going to be successful? Right. And that's what he needs to do. That's what we like. It's about the slate. It's about your slate. And I mean, that's what gets people to the movies. That's what drives urgency. Even if it's a small teeny movie with a small teeny audience, great. Have a small teeny budget. And then overdo it, right? Like,
it goes to what Tim always says about, it's always about asking the why. And I think there's a lot of times in Hollywood that movies are made, the point about show business and show friends is spot on, because the Wall Street Journal profile of Zaslav opened with that quote, because Zaslav was like, why did you make Cry Macho? Are you kidding me? I mean, even though it's Clint Eastwood, and yes, he's done great movies for the studio, and yes, they make money, but at the end of the day, why did you make this movie? And they said, well, Clint Eastwood's done really good movies for us. Like, well, we can't be making movies like at this price point for that.
Right.
It just can't happen.
You can make the movie, you can let it do it. This is how, this is under these circumstances only is how we're going to make that movie.
All right. So, exit question. Are you going to see Top Gun again?
I mean, if I have the opportunity to, I would. Absolutely. Yeah.
I was talking to somebody today. I think I might try to see it again, because I really did enjoy it. It was a lot of fun.
It will get
so Rob,
double viewers for sure.
Yeah.
It will get double.
So. Oh, I think so. Yeah. So Robin, thanks again for filling in for Tim. Hopefully, I said last week, actually in my newsletter, that he would be returning, and unfortunately he did not. So hopefully he'll be back on Friday. But thank you again, Robin, for stepping into his shoes. It's always great to see you. Always great to have you. And I'm sure we'll have you back.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me, as always.
Of course. All right. We'll see you again at Top Gun, right?
Yeah.
I can't wait for Top Gun 3.
I'll be wearing the flight suit this time.
Awesome. I love it. All right. Have a good week. Thanks again, Robin.
Thank you so much.